Starting off this list, we have the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. This cult with the catchiest name was founded in Uganda by 4 ex-Roman Catholic priests, 2 ex-nuns, and 1 former sex worker, and it was initially said to really emphasize the Ten Commandments. Apparently these leaders thought that the Roman Catholic Church had really abandoned the Ten Commandments, and they wanted to bring back some rules. They couldn't just focus on these rules, however, they also had some doomsday prophecies as well, like all good cults. They claimed that the apocalypse would come on December 31st, 1999, and in anticipation of this, a bunch of the members sold all of their possessions, so of course they were pretty irritated when the world in fact did not end. The leaders scrambled and instead altered their prediction, saying that the Virgin Mary would instead come on March 17th, 2000, and that she would bring them all to heaven. The followers continued to believe this, and on March 16th they had a huge feast. The following day, on March 17th, police arrived to where the cult resided and found that an explosion and fire had killed hundreds of members of the group. At first they thought that this could have been a voluntary event, but soon they saw the signs that pointed to this being a mass killing. The leaders likely took the lives of the followers because they could not pay them back, and they also knew that their quote-unquote prophecies were false. At first it was thought that the leaders were among those whose bodies were found, but that isn't quite the case. No one is exactly sure if they ended up losing their lives or if instead they fled the country, which many people believe. At this point there's still a warrant out for their arrest, so while the authorities have never officially confirmed that they are on the run, it is truly the most likely scenario. In our number 9 spot today, we have Karen Zerby. Karen is the leader of the cult now known as the Family of Love, which is much better known by its former name, the Children of God. In 1969, Karen joined a group called Teens for Christ and ended up becoming the personal secretary to David Berg, who was the one who founded the group. Eventually, David would divorce his wife in order to marry Karen. Karen had a son named Ricky, and his childhood was made into a book which was used to show other members of the cult how they should raise their children, but the book included some pretty horrific and disturbing content. At first, Karen wasn't around or extremely active in the cult, but she began to insert herself more and more and began making rules and enforcing discipline. Once David began to get sick in 1988, Karen took over the leadership position that she had been groomed for. After David passed away, she married another leader from the cult, and all the while Karen was extremely elusive, so much so that some of her followers didn't even know what she looked like. This cult has actually seen a few celebrities over the years. Jeremy Spencer, who is one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac, is a member of this cult. Joaquin Phoenix and his siblings were unfortunately subject to this terrible cult when they were growing up, but they all chose to leave later in life and as adults have spoken out about the cult. Unfortunately, Karen is still active as the cult's leader, even though she most definitely should be in prison, and she still remains in hiding, living off of what money she could collect from her followers. In our number 8 spot today, we have Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is the president of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, and is also serving a life plus 20-year sentence, which is exactly where he should be, but before being caught, he lived his life in hiding from the authorities, trying to flee the persecution he had to know was coming. His father was once the president of the cult, but when he passed away, the position was passed on to Warren. As new leader of the polygamous cult, he said that no one should even attempt to marry one of his father's widows, but just a few days later he himself married all of them except for 2 because one refused and then was banned from ever marrying again, and the other ran away. If your marriage proposal causes someone to flee the cult that they're in, you clearly aren't a very good person. Warren had the power to assign who would marry who, but he was also able to punish a man by taking his wives and children and assigning them to another man. As a man, you had to have at least 3 wives in order to get into heaven, but the more wives, the more likely it would be that you got into heaven. In 2005, the Texas authorities conducted a raid and took legal custody of 416 children after someone called in and tipped them off about all of the horrible things that were happening at the ranch. In 2006, Warren was arrested and is still serving his sentence. There is so much more to this case that we don't have the time to cover, but there was a documentary released this year called Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, which I would fully recommend if you want to know more about this horrible person. In our number 7 spot today, we have Adolfo De Jesus Constanzo. Adolfo was at one point a dealer and also the leader of a horrifying cult that was nicknamed by the media the Narco-Satanists. Adolfo's followers believed that he had magical abilities, but in the worst way possible. He required his followers to kidnap young men who Adolfo would practice horrible, sadistic rituals on and ultimately take their lives in order to replenish his magic. It's an absolutely horrific story, and this carried on for years until the disappearance of Mark Kilroy. Mark was a Texas college student who was in Mexico for some fun over spring break in 1989, but sadly during this trip he was taken by the cult's followers. Mark's friends quickly noticed his disappearance and began searching for him. This led to a border-crossing manhunt, and authorities quickly revealed what had been going on, but Adolfo had already fled. He and 4 of his followers fled to Mexico City, and this is how he was finally caught. Police were called to the apartment they were staying at as a result of a totally unrelated dispute, but because Adolfo knew they were looking for him, he just assumed that they were there for him, and he opened fire with a machine gun. Not wanting to go to prison, he then handed the weapon over to one of his followers and asked him to open fire on himself, and by the time police were able to reach the apartment, he was already dead. In the end, 14 cult members were charged for the crimes relating to everything that went on. In our number 6 spot today we have Shoko Asahara, leader of the Aum Shinrikyo cult and claiming to be the reincarnation of the Hindu god Shiva. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. He said he was destined to lead his followers to salvation once the apocalypse came, but then once he lured in followers, he claimed he could also teach them to levitate and develop telepathic abilities. Apparently those who were most skeptical, he allowed them to drink his bathwater. I have no idea why or what this was supposed to be for, and I wish I could unlearn it, to be honest, but now we all have to suffer with that information together. The cult continued to grow, and it drew in influential and wealthy people. And what did Shoko do? He devised a plan and had a group go on to attack Tokyo in 1994, which took the lives of 7 people. Then in 1995 they released gas into the Tokyo underground, which led to 12 deaths, 50 injured people, and more than 5,000 people with temporary vision problems. Of course, this sent him into hiding as he didn't want to face the consequences of his actions. After several months, however, he was found hiding out in the group's compound near Mount Fuji. In the end, Asahara and 11 of his disciples ended up being arrested and charged, and they were all sentenced to death in 2004. In our number 5 spot today we have David Koresh. You may also know him as Vernon Howell, but whatever you call him, he sucks. In the 1930s, Lois and Ben Rodin, who were the founders of the Branch Davidian sect, believed that a new messiah would arrive. Shortly after this is when David joined the group and he began to get close to the pair. After Lois passed away, he managed to gain control of the following, and he changed his name to become the new leader and self-proclaimed messiah. Under the control of David, allegations of horrible crimes began to come out from the cult, and on February 28, 1993, there was a warrant issued for his arrest, but David wasn't about to give up that easily. David hid himself inside of a compound, and when the authorities came knocking, things escalated and there was a shootout in which 6 members of the group lost their lives, but so did 4 members of the ATF. Over 51 days there were negotiations being made with David while he continued to stall. It is said that this all finally came to an end when the FBI carried out a last mission to take members of the sect by force. This is when the compound they were in was set on fire and 76 members of the Davidians, including David himself, perished. In our number 4 spot today we have Jim Jones. Jim is certainly one of the most well-known people on this list for all of the wrong reasons. He is the man who claimed that he was the reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Gandhi, and he founded the cult which was originally called Wings of Deliverance, but he later changed the name to the People's Temple Full Gospel Church. After an expose in the New West magazine about the things going on in this cult, Jim felt the need to move him and his followers into hiding. In order to flee the media scrutiny in the United States, Jim leased land in Guyana and ended up moving them all there. From here there were claims of horrible things and human rights violations, which led to another investigation. People found out that some of the supposed members of this cult were actually being held against their will. In the end, with all of this going on, Jim managed to convince his followers to all take their lives in one massive, horrible event event, and this day has gone on to become known as the Jonestown Massacre. A total of 918 people died that day, including Jim himself. In our number 3 spot today, we have the True Russian Orthodox Church, also known as Heavenly Jerusalem. This cult was an offshoot of the Russian Orthodox Church founded by Peter Kuznetsov. Back in 2007, there were about 30 members of this group that all went into hiding in a Russian cave, where Peter told them that they had to wait until the world ended in 2008. This one is a little different from the others on this list because while Peter put these members into the cave, he didn't go in there with them. After 2 members died in the cave, one passed from cancer and the other from starvation, some of the members ended up deciding to leave. Like, thank goodness. They ended up leaving because they were frightened of the toxic fumes that could come from the corpses. The other members in the cave only left after the roof of the cave started to collapse in 2008. In May of that year, after the bodies of those who had passed were removed by authorities, the cave was then blown up. In our number 2 spot today, we have Daniel Perez. Daniel Perez might be better known by his alias Lou Castro, but whatever you want to call him, he led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to just throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on being the worst. Basically, he had this clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies in order to live a lavish lifestyle. Like, as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so that he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. In 2010, Castro moved from Kansas to Tennessee and adopted a new identity, but he was soon arrested by the FBI for aggravated identity theft and fraudulent use of a social security card number. While serving time for this crime, it was discovered what his real name was, as well as the charges that had been placed against that former identity. Thankfully, in February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail. In our number 1 spot today, we have Bonito Masaro. At 25 years old, Bonito decided to move his life to America, where he began to post his teachings online, but recently, former members of his cult have begun speaking out about the harm that they faced as a part of it. It is said that many of his beliefs follow the sort of ideas of igniting a quote global awakening, and that he plans to quote establish an enlightened civilization ready for interstellar absorption by 2035. But aside from these lofty goals and ideologies, the leader has come under his fair share of scrutiny, and for good reason. His first time in the hot seat was back in 2017 after somebody took their own life at one of his 12-day Sedona retreats. This story quickly picked up the attention of the media, where critics began referring to him as quote Steve Jobs meets Jim Jones. Apparently, as a result of this criticism, he ended up moving from the United States back to Holland. This is where he continued to hold retreats, but because of the intense scrutiny, he has vanished quite a bit from holding these in-person events, instead moving a lot of his content over to, you guessed it, right here on YouTube. And he is not shy in showing off the money he has been given by his followers. One of Bonito's former followers, Jade Electra, has taken to her Instagram to warn others of the danger of his cult and teachings. She wrote, quote, "He is a walking dementor, and I am standing up and sharing the truth because too many are abused and stuck behind the fear, the bullying that occurs in the cults, and their literal gag orders students are given before they even know what will happen to them." Another former member who also spoke out, Keelan McNeil, wrote, quote, "Over the course of the years, it became increasingly and eventually blaringly obvious that Bonito Masaro's intention is to not actually help the planet or others, but it is to use his, quote, mission or organization to get what he wants, which is only women, money, and power." She continued on, quote, "I want you all to know that the psychological and spiritual warfare that takes place behind closed doors and within Bonito Masaro's community is extremely dark and dangerous. People are giving up their free will under the guise of transcending their egos, and Bonito Masaro is exploiting them in every way that he can as a result."
Starting off this countdown, we have Heaven's Gate. Founded in 1974 and led by Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite, the Heaven's Gate cult believed in UFOs and impending doom. They convinced their followers that the only way they could escape this was by taking their own lives. By doing this, they believed that they would reach the next level and help evolution on other planets. And according to them, Jesus was an extraterrestrial, and when he died, his body rose from the dead before being carried away by a spaceship. Interesting, I know. In 1997, 39 members took their lives, and they were all found wearing arm patches that read "Heaven's Gate Away Team." Moving on to number 9, we have the Church Universal and Triumphant. The Church Universal and Triumphant was founded in 1975. It was run by a woman named Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She made her followers believe that she was a channel for God. Apparently, God told her that the world was going to end, so she moved her church compound near Yellowstone National Park for safety reasons. She said that the end of the world would come in 1990 after a nuclear war between the US and Russia. When that didn't happen, a lot of members left the cult. Slowly over time, the cult just dissolved. In our 8th spot, we have William Miller. William Miller was an American Baptist preacher as well as the founder of Adventism. He was known for preaching about the end of the world, which he prophesied would be in 1844. He thought the end would come as a purifying apocalypse so the world would be cleansed of sinners. Miller and his followers, the Millerites, believed that there would be a fire in which saints would be resurrected and they would cleanse the world of this evil. When this didn't happen, he lost his loyal followers. In fact, the day in which the world didn't end is now referred to as the Great Disappointment. In our 4th spot, we have The Family. Otherwise known as the Great White Brotherhood, this was an Australian New Age group led by a woman named Anne Hamilton. She convinced her followers that she was the reincarnation of Jesus. She also said that Buddha and Krishna were other spiritual beings that came down to help humanity. And of course, they all believed that the end was near. The cult lived away together in the countryside outside of Melbourne. The kids were instructed to never talk to outside people. They were all homeschooled. Those that didn't listen were punished through beatings, starvation, or emotional torture. People there were also frequently drugged with hallucinogenics. In the end, the police raided the cult and saved the 28 children that they had brought in. Anne and the other woman helping her were then criminally charged. And a number of cult members actually sued her for psychiatric and psychological illness upon other things. It said that she paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to her victims. Moving on to number 3, we have Box Canyon Cult. Located in Southern California, Box Canyon was the perfect rocky hideaway for a doomsday cult. It all started when a man who went by the name of Krishna Venta claimed that he was the second coming of Christ and was over 240,000 years old. In 1948, he bought 25 acres of land in Box Canyon to build a monastery and several rooms for his followers to stay in. In the monastery, Venta would preach about the impending World War III, which would spark the end of the world. He said that World War III was their chance to take back the world, but they were never able to see their plan through. In 1958, 2 men whose wives joined the cult decided to bomb it. The blast killed them, Venta, and 7 of the followers. Some of the survivors stayed there, whereas others went to join Jim Jones's cult and later passed away there. In our 2nd spot, we have the Order of the Solar Temple. This cult was formed in 1984 by Joseph DiMambro and Luc Jouret. It started off its teachings based on New Age spiritualism, but they realized that they got more followers when they started to become more doomsday focused. And then these followers brought them more money, so they loved that. So they believed that once the end of the world came, they would be transported to another planet and then live there. Now, the history of what went down in this cult is very complex, so I'm just gonna do a quick rundown. In the 1990s, authorities started to investigate this group. In 1994, a man and his family were killed after speaking out about the cult. Days later, 2 temple buildings in Switzerland burnt to the ground. 48 bodies were found inside. Some were shot, others were injected with tranquilizers and left to perish in the fire. Then in 1995, a building in the Swiss Alps burnt down. 16 bodies were found inside there. Then in 1997, a building in Quebec burnt down. 5 more members died then. In total, 74 cult members passed away. To this day though, this cult still exists.
Number 10. The Freedomites. After the Tsarist persecution in Russia, a group of pacifist anti-materialist Christians, referred to as spirit warriors, fled the country and came to Canada in the 20th century. While many were happy to just live freely off the land, a section of the group grew unhappy at the Canadians for asking them to attend school and enlist in the military. This group called themselves the Sons of Freedom, or Freedomites, and despite their name, wanted to impose their way of belief on others. They were most famous for their dislike of materialism, and would often show this by protesting in the complete nude. Many photos of the group of farmers marching in the nude became pretty famous and put the religion on the map. They didn't simply protest in the nude though. They took to another more violent outlet, arson, burning down many buildings including homes, schools, courtrooms, and bridges. This led to the persecution of the entire group, including the peaceful ones who hadn't been involved, and they were pretty much wiped out of the country. Number 6. Sinon. In 1958, Sinon was opened in Santa Monica, and it would be active there for over 30 years, having 1,300 members at its peak. This group mainly recruited addicts and took many different forms over its lifespan: a rehabilitation program, a utopian society, and a church. It was created by Charles Dedrich, and its staples were its focus on quitting cold turkey, tough love, and something called the game, where one member of the group opens up and the rest verbally attack them. Hundreds of people eventually moved in and paid to live there, Sinon at one point having around $33 million in assets. But Charles' greed and hunger for power only continued to grow, and the conditions in the place worsened over time, facing accusations of things like abduction and brainwashing. The lawsuit placed and won made Charles so angry that he got his followers to put a venomous snake in the man's mailbox, the man barely surviving. He was eventually arrested, and Sinon was shut down for the allegations and for tax fraud. Number 4. Demis Kanjang. Demis Kanjang was able to form a cult fairly easily. The leaders of these types of groups will usually try to convince you of something, whether it be that they are an alien or have magical healing powers. Demis did this by convincing people that he could pull money out of thin air, and the way that he did it is incredibly simple. You can see videos of him demonstrating this online. He simply puts his hands behind his back, and then brings them forward with money in them, obviously having just kept the money behind his back. But it was somehow still enough to convince people that he had magic powers, sometimes pulling not just money from the air, but also meatballs and plastic bags of soup. He somehow managed to amass thousands of followers and almost $38 million in donations, even coming from high-ranking members of the military and people in government. When 2 of his followers realized that he was eventually going to run out of money to pull from behind his back, they confronted him, and he responded by having them both killed. He was arrested and convicted in 2016 and still has another 12 years to serve. Number 3. Scientology. The so-called Church of Scientology was developed by L. Ron Hubbard and surrounds the idea that humans have trauma preventing them from experiencing life properly, and that they must work towards a spiritual state called clear. Their teaching surrounds a few different truths, some of them being listed as: man is an immortal spiritual being. His experience extends well beyond a single lifetime. His capabilities are unlimited, even if not presently realized. They also believe in an alien called Xenu who brought all his buddies to Earth 75 million years ago and blew them up next to a volcano, which, makes sense. You've probably heard about Scientology because of just how many celebrities are connected to it. Its members include people like Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and Kirstie Alley. Scientology is incredibly controversial, mostly due to the reports of them brainwashing their members and the evidence that the cult had been created for the express purpose of making money. Number 1. The FLDS. If you've been browsing through Netflix recently, then you've probably seen the limited series called Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey. The series documents the history of the group called the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, or FLDS for short. It chronicles the series of people who have managed to escape from the group, which broke off from Mormonism in the 1930s after polygamy was outlawed. It was led by Rulon Jeffs, but things apparently didn't get too bad until his son, Warren Jeffs, took over, dissipating the council and taking complete control over the group. Many terrible things happened throughout their history, and if you want the full details, feel free to watch the series. I really do recommend it. It included things like psychological blackmail, separating children from their families to be sent to do labor on a supposed utopia in Texas, and more. Things came to a head in a 2008 raid of the compound and Jeffs went to prison, but the group is still active today, with Jeffs still giving teachings from behind bars.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Hogan Fukunaga. Hogan is the founder of a cult that is often called the foot reading cult. Hogan made claims that he would be able to diagnose people by examining their feet. Other than his potentially false diagnosis, this wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, except for the fact that he charged people $900 for a foot reading. Hogan also claimed to be the world's final savior, third in line after Jesus Christ and Buddha. This cult started in 1980 while Hogan was 34 years old and apparently was more than 500 million yen in debt. Hogan would read people's feet and then tell them their problems, but would say these issues could only be fixed if they attended a cult seminar, which would cost them 2.25 million yen, or if they donated 14.3 million yen to the cult. I feel like this red flag should have been more than enough to warn people, but at one point the group claimed to have 30,000 members. Hogan was eventually arrested and sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud, and the cult went bankrupt. In our number 8 spot today we have Chris Korda. Chris Korda is a musician and software developer who is also the leader of the Church of Euthanasia. This is a cult that says they aim to restore the balance between humans and the other species on Earth. Chris describes the cult as the only anti-human religion, considering the whole cult is based on the idea of drastically reducing the human population voluntarily. There are some interesting and extremely problematic slogans and pillars that go along with the cult, and one commandment that reads, "Thou shalt not procreate." This cult has done some extremely offensive and distasteful things and actually puts out videos and promotions on how to take your own life, which is terrible. Chris is still very active as the cult's leader and also continues to put out music. In our number 7 spot today we have Rael. Rael is a French journalist who is also the founder of what is called the Realism movement, which is a UFO cult. Apparently Rael had some sort of extraterrestrial encounter in December of 1973, and this is what led him to found this movement. Rael says that during his alien encounter, the alien told him that he was the chosen one and he needed to spread the message to the people on Earth. This UFO cult believes that humans were created by an alien species, and once we find a way to find peace on Earth, those aliens will come down and tell us our true origins and bring us utopia. It seems as though Rael now lives in Canada and he still continues to spread his message. In our number 5 spot today we have Harold Klemp. Harold is actually probably the most normal and least scary person on this list, which truly is a relief. Harold is the leader of the cult of Ekankar, which was originally founded by Paul Twitchell. After Paul passed away, Harold became the new group leader. This group focuses on a lot of spiritual practices and exercises and doesn't have a ton of weird rules when you join. No dietary requirements, no taboo things you're forced into, and you don't even have to leave your current religion or faith to join the group. There have, of course, been extremely problematic members who have done some very questionable things, but not at the command of the group or Harold, to my knowledge. Harold continues to lead the group, and they even have a website, a Twitter page, and a YouTube account. In our number 3 spot today, we have Buffalo Bill Hawkins. Buffalo Bill, who is also known as Yisrael, is the founder of the House of Yahweh. Bill and his brothers say that they were sent by Yahweh to prepare the world for the second coming of the Messiah. They believe that the House of Yahweh is the oldest and only true faith, and that the world is about to experience the Great Tribulation, which is a sign of the end times. They also believe that the Bible refers to Satan as the god of this world. This cult isn't unlike a lot of other religions, and they have their own beliefs and ideologies. Bill has attempted and of course failed to predict the end times throughout the years, the most recent prediction being in 2016. In 2008, Bill was arrested on 4 counts of bigamy, and his bail was originally set at $10 million before it was reduced to $100,000. He ended up being released in 2009 after he pleaded no contest to some other charges that had been laid against him, and he was only given a fine and probation.
Moving on to number 8, we have the Brethren. This one is quite interesting. So the Brethren have also been given the name the Body of Christ, or Brothers and Sisters, and even Garbage Eaters. Why? Well, you're about to find out, that's for sure. So for starters, this cult believes that the end of the world is near, and so they are told they have to purify themselves in preparation for the end of the world. They do this by selling their possessions and breaking ties with all their family and friends. They then live as vagrants, eating garbage, hardly ever bathing, and never receive any medical treatment. They also do weird jobs to make money, but then any money they earn just goes right into the group. Due to this lifestyle, a number of group members have had serious mental breakdowns, others have sadly taken their lives. Not a cult you would want to be a part of. Honestly, no cult you want to be a part of. Coming in at number 7, we have the Realism. Founded in 1974, this cult believes that life was created by aliens. Yes, you heard me correctly, aliens. These aliens then assumed human form to go check in on Earth and see how things are going. These aliens are said to be people like Jesus or the Buddha. So this cult spends their days worshipping space aliens. The scariest part? In 2000, they claimed that they founded a cloning company and that they managed to successfully clone a human. Literally everyone went nuts, and the White House even got involved in this, even though they never had any proof of the cloning. Unless the White House was like, okay, we'll pay you guys, just give us this device so we can clone people, but it stays between us. Dude, imagine? Okay, like that's freaky.